Okay, good morning, everybody. Welcome. Thank you very much for coming today. We have a good opportunity to get a little update on the regional situation, with the Arab Spring being about a year old now, and particularly in Tunisia and Egypt, where we're having very different experiences in the implementation of democratic transition. Let me just start by making a few observations about where we are right now. It seems to me that in many ways the Arab Spring is taking a breather. At the very least, it's entering a consolidation phase, or in some cases, a long, bloody war of attrition. How long this phase will last is anybody's guess. Even so, in this consolidation phase, if you want to call it that, there's a great deal of political churn. Egypt is readying itself for a presidential election in June, despite the fact that the candidate selection process has been disrupted, upended by the Electoral Commission's decision to disqualify 10 presidential candidates. Tunisia is preparing now to write a new constitution. Libya itself is preparing for elections in June, as well as the drafting of its own constitution. Syria, the Syrians have appeared to settle in for a long and bloody struggle, both through force of arms and a struggle as well for the hearts and minds of fellow Syrians and for the wavering international community. It still seems very undecided on what to do about the situation there. And in Bahrain, they're preparing for another major event. This is the Formula One race this week, of course, which the rulers hope won't be disrupted by political upheaval or pesky charges of human rights violations. In all of the political developments that are taking place now in this critical phase, the role of civil society is paramount. Only civil society in these countries is fully equipped to hold ruling elites accountable, shine light on corruption and injustice, and keep political processes honest and help mediate between the ruler and the ruled, all extremely important functions going forward. And as you look at the role of civil society and how they're performing these roles, the record is highly mixed. In Libya, hundreds of civil society organizations have grown up even before Gaddafi was overthrown, but especially afterwards, both in Benghazi and Tripoli. All of these groups want to play a role in the transition that the society is going through, but they lack the experience and knowledge that would help them to do so. They're appealing to the international community for technical assistance, for knowledge that would help them play these important roles. And lots of people are there on the ground to help, including Freedom House, which recently did an assessment and training mission to Libya. But whether civil society in Libya can play this important role before restrictions are possibly imposed on their activities, and certainly in the face of determined political activism by armed militias, is anybody's guess. Tunisia has seen the rise of new civil society organizations and the rehabilitation of old ones, and the establishment of a relatively liberal registration and operating environment. But there are chilling restrictions on freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of the press. These are of great concern to civil society groups, to society in general, and it may serve to inhibit the operations of civil society organizations. And in Syria, of course, no civil society organization can operate effectively on the ground there, unless you happen to be one that is registered and operating outside the country, like the Syrian Observatory for Civil Rights. And in Bahrain, long-established organizations have been told what topics they can and cannot discuss. Some have been subjected to slander by the authorities, including Bahraini diplomatic authorities, on the basis of alleged sectarian biases. And of course, in Egypt, the government has launched a campaign to discredit civil society organizations, inhibit their operations, and subject them to a spurious and politically motivated legal process, essentially designed to put them out of business. This is true of both some certain international organizations, such as Freedom House, but also certain Egyptian organizations as well. 7 of our employees in Egypt and abroad, including Nancy here, have been indicted, and in the case of Nancy and her colleagues in Egypt, have been placed in a cage during the first 3 hearings in this long, drawn-out trial process, where once we hoped that the U.S. government would act strongly to persuade the Egyptian government to end this fraudulent case, the U.S. waiver of certification requirements for the delivery of military assistance to the Egyptian army has really squandered whatever leverage that we had to really influence this case. Whether that leverage can be reinstated is perhaps a subject for discussion during the question and answer period. So we're closely watching whether this waiver is going to prompt others in the region to prosecute their own campaigns against civil society. We know that Egypt itself has been emboldened, denying registration to a number of organizations in the recent weeks. And the UAE, of course, shut down 3 international pro-democracy groups by their own admission in solidarity with what the Egyptian authorities had done. Whether this is a trend remains to be seen, but clearly there are troublesome signs that suggest the possibility of a mounting backlash against pro-democracy activists and their allies in civil society. Today we're very fortunate to have 2 of our directors in from the field. We had a global staff retreat earlier in the week, and they're very happy to be here to discuss these and other issues that you may have. I should introduce myself first. I'm Charles Dunne. I'm the Director for Middle East and North Africa Programs here at Freedom House. To my left is Nancy Okail. She is our Cairo Project Director. Nancy came to us with 10 years of experience in development and civil society work, and she has the unique distinction of having both worked for the Egyptian government and Faisal Naga in the Ministry of International Cooperation, and for Fathi Ibrahim in the Ibn Khaldun Center. So she brings a unique perspective to the issues that we're going to discuss here today. On my right is Fathi Zabaar. He is our Tunis Project Director. He also has 10 years of experience in restorative justice, rule of law, and human rights, and he also had the distinction of being a Freedom House employee in our Tunisia office in 2006 to 2007. So he brings very long experience in our organization as well, and has been doing a great job on the ground working on our transitional justice and judicial reform projects in Tunisia. I will be happy to turn it over to Nancy to discuss the current situation in Egypt and the role that civil society is and should be playing there.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Freedom House for giving me this opportunity to come here and present this perspective about Egypt. And as I always say, it's very hard to talk about Egypt in 10 minutes. Is so unfair, but what I will try to do is that I will try to highlight the main issues that we are facing now in Egypt, but give you a little bit of a background on how I see the trends of everything that happened in the past 16 months and how we got there. And I will use 2 examples to highlight when something went right and something went wrong, and what are the enabling conditions that led to that. So if the way I see what happened in Egypt is, although everyone was so surprised and mesmerized by the way the Egyptian revolution took place and saw it as something very exceptional, looking by the benefit of hindsight, I think it was only normal what happened. It was like very few moments where we see that things happened that broke away with the norm. The way I see it, it was just everything that we were facing, but just blown out of proportion. And like using the academic language, maybe what happened in Egypt I see is like moving from the orthodox to the heterodox, but never broke away from the main field of power that we were suffering from. All the time in Egypt, everything, I mean, people always got together in solidarity when they were faced by a challenge, and this is what happened in Egypt. All the time in Egypt, I don't know if the mic is working. Yeah, is this better? Yeah. Egyptians are always known for their sense of humor. Yes, it was exaggerated in Tahrir Square. they always stand by each other, and we've seen that in many instances in Egypt, from a crisis of football with Algeria, it was the same, and a crisis of an earthquake, it was the same behavior. And if you look at the newspapers and the descriptions of how Egyptians behaved, it was just the same. And it was also the same with the political forces and the issues that were given attention. For example, after the euphoria of the 18 months, the 18 days of the revolution were over, everything that happened was just a demonstration of the trends that we have been seeing in Egypt. When women went out on International Women's Day to demonstrate in Tahrir Square, they were silenced. They were told that this is not the time for you. So again, women's issue, as always, has been put to the side. The poor and the marginalized, when they try to come out and ask for their demands as well, because as far as we knew that this revolution came with the slogan عيش حرية عدالة اجتماعية, or social justice, bread and freedom, and they believed in this slogan and they went out asking for those rights. They were told that these are self-serving interests and it's not the time for it right now. When people went out demanding their civil rights and issues about their religious freedoms, or where we were faced instances of sectarian rifts, the way the government dealt with it is always in the same impunitive way. It was not dealt with in court. It was not dealt with by the rule of law. It was dealt with exceptional committees that were formed with leaders from the religious groups to solve the issue on the side, not in an institutionalized and rule of law way. So everything, as you see, and there are many examples, everything was just following the same trends that we had before, but under exceptional circumstances and under the awe of thinking that, yes, after 30 years, a dictator just stepped down, or we made them step down. So, what is happening now? I mean, it's just like when I take a couple of minutes to show you how the different stakeholders in the scene in Egypt are behaving. So we have mainly SCAF, where the Supreme Council of Armed Forces. We have the cabinet, and we have the newly formed government. We also have different stakeholders or players, whereas we have the media and we have the civil society and the activists. It's like, how do these players behave currently in Egypt, and under which circumstances? Well, the SCAF, ever since took power, they wanted to maintain a tolerant face. I mean, but they were always ambivalent on trying to just being fed up with the protest and everything going wrong. They just wanted to have things go back as it was, but they couldn't really always maintain that face, because every time when things go out of proportion, they crack down and they use violence. As for the government, the cabinets that were formed and the different prime ministers we've seen, they've been always ineffective, very weak and very docile, and just taking their orders from the authority, as was at the time of Mubarak. At the time of the Mubarak, they were taking their orders from the president. Now they're taking their orders from SCAF. The few ones that were supposed to be more in a way different, taking a different approach, were not able to push in a different agenda. And then we had the holdovers from the old regime, and the biggest example is Faiza Abu-Naga, the Minister of International Cooperation, who behaved even in a more atrocious way than the times of Mubarak. We had the main issues that we've been suffering from getting worse and worse, and one of the highest and most important issues on the agenda was the issue of security in Egypt, and how the Ministry of Interior was handling the situation. We had a breakout, of course, as expected, and everyone knows of violence. It was we've seen a series of kidnaps in Egypt, something we haven't heard of before, a series of breaking on banks, and we've seen a change of 3 ministers of Interior who failed to live up to the expectations of the Egyptians to restore security back. Of course, all these conditions were affecting the economic situation in Egypt, which was also going from bad to worse. Now, and as for the media, which is like a very, very important player in the politics of Egypt, and one of the main, I would say, guards for the Mubarak regimes, because they are like propagating everything. Was the mouthpiece for the regime mainly. Again, after the revolution, we had hope, because we've seen several new independent channels established, new newspapers coming out, a louder voice for the opposition, but this was very short-lived. Why was it short-lived? On one hand, the state media was the same, their leaders were the same, and was the same approach, the same censorship, but the independent ones were owned by Egyptian businessmen who's got so much at stake, and it's very, very easy to be pressured and coerced to just even impose self-censoring on themselves. So you see, everything I've spoken about so far is just the same trends that we've been experiencing in Egypt, but just on a bigger scale, maybe highlighted, maybe dramatized in a way. But there are two instances where I see things went different. And if I would single out one incident in Egypt that represents a breakaway from the norm, was actually not many people pay attention to it, which is the case of Samira Ibrahim, who was subjected to one of the few girls that were the girls that were subjected to virginity test by the military soldiers after a protest in Tahrir Square. Why is this incident so significant, and what does it tell us about the conditions that can create a breakaway from the norm, and not just a move from the orthodox to the heterodox within the same norms and the same issues? Samira Ibrahim was one of few of the girls that were protesting in Tahrir Square. They were caught, and the military conducted a virginity test on them. What happened is that the international media caught her story, got her on CNN, and she spoke publicly about it. And then she had the support of some independent civil society lawyers that supported her, took her case to court, and she actually won. I mean, she came out triumph by having a ruling against the virginity test. But why is this different? This is different because Samira Ibrahim does not come from an elitist family in Egypt, where she is backed by the support that usually women in Egypt from privileged background can get, that support and get this sort of protection. So this is one thing that is really different. This is a breakaway from the norm. The second thing is that Samira Ibrahim comes from Upper Egypt, which is a very, very conservative Islamic, mostly religious background, and anyone who knows a little about Egypt knows that this cannot be expected at all from someone from that background. She would know that she would be ostracized by her family and by her community, but she did come out and spoke publicly. What other thing that is different about that case is as a representation of a moment of an independent judiciary, where an independent judge had the guts to come out and support a case that he saw that is different. And the fourth thing is that we had the international media support for her that actually gave backing to this whole story. So we see four factors. The factors that would support a breakaway from the norm is an international media support, an independent judiciary, a media that coded up the story and brought it out to the public. And these ingredients in this very small and simple story shows, what we need to bring those small incidents and take it to a bigger scale in everything that we are suffering from in Egypt. But how did this story went wrong after that is when her case was tried in military court. And this shows you what happens when the SCAF and the rule of military can do and reverse all the positive things that happened. So this is the one example where I see that things went right and the conditions that made it go right. What went wrong was and this is here's when the professional and the personal and the national blur, for my experience, is what we've been suffering from throughout the past maybe 6 months with the issue of the civil society organization and the crackdown in civil society organization. One thing that was positive from Samira Ibrahim's incident as a positive incident is the support of civil society, and really very active, independent civil society lawyers who stood by her, and not just the usual suspects, the well-known organizations, the famous ones that are supported and acknowledged by the government. No, they were very young, independent, middle-class lawyers that stood by her. So what would the government do? They crack on civil society. They crack on those instances and crack down in the media and crack down on civil society. What happened in our case in the NGO law, in the NGO case, is that those who are in authority, those who do not want to see the revolution go into the right direction, or does not want to see what happened in the 25th of January of 2011 happen again, they studied the scene very carefully, and they saw what are the main effective actors that were there, and civil society were one, and they wanted to kill that. They did it through a smear campaign in the media that we've seen in Egypt and has been escalating, criminalizing the work of civil society and defaming those who work in it, and putting the workers of those working in civil society behind bars to take that picture of those human rights activists and workers behind bars and make an example for the rest of the people in Egypt to see this is what happens to you when you pursue that goal. And third, putting forward an NGO law that is very restrictive and that is going to totally prohibit or deter any effective work of civil society. We had the Law 84 in Egypt at the time of Mubarak. We've been suffering from it for a very long time, and now they are putting on an even worse and more restrictive law. And then finally, as what was positive in Samira Ibrahim's case was quoting the international attention is receding from our case, is that because the international community turned its back to us once the foreigners has left and once the waiver was passed, and we were left alone and no one knows what was going on for us in Egypt. So these are the conditions when things can go right, and the support that we can get, that we can push it forward. Just an example and demonstration of the different aspects and ingredients for progress: an independent judiciary, an independent media, a support from the international community. And this is how things go when all these are absent. We have a very dependent judiciary and taking their orders from the executive body and really following just the orders. We have the international, we have the local media following the orders as well of the authorities. We have the absence of the international community attention. This is how it went totally wrong. I will stop here, and I think we have a more optimistic story from Tunisia, and then maybe after that we get the
yes, so we can. Thanks, and hopefully we'll end our formal presentation before questions on an up note, but I'm not so sure. Let's find out.
Exactly, that's quite an assumption, but let's try. Yeah, positive. I mean, yes, Tunisia is doing pretty fine. I mean, we did a good revolution. Didn't have a leader. It's great, but we'll see whether that's the best thing that can happen. But mathematically, yes, Tunisia is democracy as of last year, because in 53 years we had 2 presidents, And in 1 year, we had 4. That brings our average to 1 president every 11 years. That's pretty close to the US. So, yeah. And you know, these are some of the slogans that we heard last year. Dictator is gone, dictatorship is still there. And yes, last year we went through a lot of trouble to get to where we are today. As you know, we had a lot of insecurity and safety. We had a lot of breaking into banks. We had a lot of insecurity in general. People did not feel safe. We had the neighborhood committees to protect our neighborhoods because the police withdrew from the streets and the military took over. But the military can do only so much in a country that, and this is to the honor of Ben Ali, and it's one of the things that he did. It's ironic. He did not invest in military, but he did invest a lot in state police and security services. After the revolution, obviously there was a hype of democracy. I wanted to say dictatorship because that's the word we're used to, but there was a lot of CSOs, civil society organizations created, thousands, hundreds of parties. Great. But still, the people did not feel that's democracy, and they were still sticking to what they asked for during the revolution, dignity and freedom. So when we say that the Tunisian revolution was happened because people were hungry, that's not true. Because one of the reasons people are praised in Tunisia is because, obviously, because of the economic situation. But the reason that economically Tunisia wasn't doing as good was the human rights abuses and violations, and basically the smothering of civil society. Tunisia, before the revolution, we had maybe 5 independent civil society organizations, and 10,000 created by the regime that he uses, to go for election and re-election, and the 99% scores he always gets. The revolution happened, but continued, and it's still happening in Tunisia. Like in Tahrir Square today, they have a revolution, and Tunisia is still continuing its revolution because we, as Tunisian people, are not satisfied. After the revolution, obviously, Tunisia really hit some good benchmarks. They started with creating a commission to realize the objectives of the revolution, which was dissolved today by the Constituent Assembly, which is something questionable, and we really need to look into it and see how effective that is. But as for today, it's legally dissolved. We created a commission to investigate the violations, but this commission, I want to stop at it, because this commission investigated only the violation that occurred between December 17th, the day that Mohamed Bouazizi set himself in fire, and January 14th. So our big question, especially that we're going through the transitional justice process, what about the violations that occurred before? Because what happened in that period is, for lack of another word, mathematically, I started with math, mathematically insignificant, with the thousands of political prisoners, thousands of people that were harassed and their families and loved ones. And some people even died under torture during the Ben Ali and the Bourguiba era. So that's a question about the commission to investigate the violation that occurred between December 17, 2010 and January 14, 2011. And but also there are other the committee to organize the elections, and they did a great work. We did have a fair election, and we did have fair and democratic elections. But at the same time, Tunisian people are asking today, is democracy a process or an outcome? We did go through a democratic process. The elections, not a lot of people are questioning them. Some do, for different reasons. These elections happen in a very special and exceptional situations, which means the outcome should be exceptional and special, but also the process after that. The elections happen. These are the first fair elections that our country knew. And a lot of people, including myself, the first time we voted, it's not because we didn't want to vote, but they didn't allow us to vote before too. And for a lot of people also knew that their vote wouldn't count anyway. So obviously, you know that Nahda won by 37%, and other party got between 13 to 0.1%, and they do call them the 0.0.0.01% parties. So yeah, we had an era before the elections that was really controversial, different governments, different ideas, different approaches. But after the elections, we had our first government, our fifth president, fourth in that year. And he's a political activist, and he's extremely known. He has been in prison. And our government, most of them were in prison, political prisoners. And I think we're the only country governed by technically felons. Technically. It's true. But it's a technicality. I can explain if you want me to. But these people really suffered, and they did make the revolution happen, either before December 17th or after. But what came after was disappointing to the Tunisian people. Us, as civil society, we witnessed a lot of good things that happened. Like, there was somehow freedom of the press. The press criticized the president. There is a lot of Facebook pages just to literally make fun of the president. You know, I wish it's translatable, but they have really funny names about him. And the media also talk about the government very openly, and you hear like a lot of criticism towards the government. But apparently the government did not really take that into consideration, because that criticism is really gold for the government, because they can take it and really run with it and make our country a democracy way faster. But what we noticed through official responses is that the government is really defensive and using some of the methods, unfortunately, very comparable to what we've been hearing before. So it's kind of a schizophrenic situation, really, where we have a very good media, very good opposition, but the government is not following the pace where the country is going, and it feels that there are reminiscences of the pre-revolution era. Some of the problem areas that we see is freedom of expression. It is extremely bothersome to us as civil society and as Tunisian, and I think to the whole world, because the world wants Tunisia to succeed in this revolution. It's something that inspired, but also dictatorship inspires too. And we hope that we do not go down that route. And I believe that Tunisian civil society and the international civil society, international media, have a role to play in this. Freedom of expression, it is bothersome to us to see that journalists go to jail in Tunisia for publishing a picture. It is extremely bothersome to us to see an owner of a TV station being prosecuted for broadcasting a movie or a cartoon, if you wish, Persepolis. It is extremely bothersome to us to see a couple of kids 2 weeks ago being sentenced for 7 years of prison each for publishing pictures on Facebook. This is extremely bothersome for us. We do believe in rule of law. Everybody does. These people did not use violence, did not threaten to use violence, and did not really bother this notion of public order that it is, it seems it's a cover for blasphemy laws in the country. Yet at the opposite, we witness violence used by certain groups in Tunisia that go unpunished, and the police forces and the government doesn't seem to hold these people accountable. In Tunisia, this person who is counted on the Salafists and allegedly is a Salafist, took down our national flag and put a black flag, the Al-Qaeda flag, over a university. This person has not been held accountable. Another group counted on Salafist on March 25th, 2012, when artists were having really a public event for kids and families. They were attacked by Salafists under the watch of the police that did not intervene, did not enforce the law. It is bothersome to us to see that freedom of assembly is curtailed, when the Minister of Interior unjustifiably bans protesting or manifesting or celebrating on our Tunisian Tahrir Square, Habib Bourguiba Avenue. It is bothersome to us. It is bothersome to us to see people who made this revolution be beaten up and taken out by force from the Ministry of the Human Rights and Transitional Justice. I told you I can promise. But also, I mean, this is a lot of blame, you would say, to put on the government. We have high expectations, and I think it's only fair to have this kind of expectations. But also, our civil society is weak. Our civil society mixes between politics and principles, human rights approach, and this is. This is making the civil society really weak and needing a lot of capacity building, but also it is defragmented. We do a lot of work on transitional justice in Tunisia, and the civil society is extremely defragmented in the sense that we have a transitional justice coalition that includes 22 organizations. But to our surprise, a few months after the creation of the coalition, there is a transitional justice network where there are other organizations, you know, and unfortunately you can tell which organizations and which political affiliations the organizations that compose each of the organization have. And there is a Tunisian Center for Transitional Justice. To our great surprise, a couple of weeks ago, there is a Tunisian Center for Transitional Justice and Human Rights that's created. So this defragmentation is weakening our civil society, and there is a lack of a long-term strategy. I feel that the civil society, they work on freedom of expression today, but there is no strategy really, no real approach, and oftentimes civil society behaves from a political standpoint. So we talk to certain ministers but not the others, we approach certain members but not others, which is weakening, I think, our civil society. But also I want to say something about politics in general. Obviously people noticed that there is a party that has the majority in the Constituent Assembly. That's the Nahda. They won 37% of the votes. And the people expected Nahda in this circumstances, in a transitional time, to work closely with other parties to build a brighter future for the country. This is not a regular election. This is not the 2012 election in France or in the US. This is first election to really put a good foundation for a democratic country. Unfortunately, this is not happening. Appointing local authorities during the last few months have been extremely concerning to political party and to the Tunisian people. It is concerning when we see that local authorities like governors that are doing great work are basically replaced by Nahda close by people, you know, by representative, by governors, sorry, close to Nahda, and the people protested against this because they felt it's unfair. It does not serve the best interest of our revolution or our nascent democracy. And at the same time, obviously, the other parties did find out that this defragmentation that I described for civil society is happening to the parties too, that call themselves progressist or non-Islamist, at least. Let's call them that way. But one of the things that's happening is that people are trying to find a leader, and I think it's cultural in patriarchal countries to assemble around a person instead of assembling around an idea. Also, our president, unfortunately, we have three presidents: the president of the republic, the president or the head of the government, we call it president of the government, and my 1 minute is here. And then the president of the Constituent Assembly. The president of the Constituent Assembly, basically, he's absent. We don't hear him much, and we wish he had a stronger voice to condemn human rights violations. President of the Republic, we don't know, because he gives us a position and then it's opposite the following day. And he also said, and this is extremely concerning as well, coming from a person that have been persecuted and prosecuted by the old regime, no one can protest against me until the next elections because I'm democratically elected. I think that's concerning coming from the head of our country. But let's remember, and tying up with what's happening in Egypt, is that the revolution in Tunisia was contagious. But if dictatorship is installed in Tunisia, in Egypt, if we don't help Egypt, if we don't work on Egypt, especially on this case, that is because it has ramifications on the NGO laws, but also ramification in the region, and they will not expand on that. Tunisia also, and whatever government we will have in Tunisia might find it extremely easy to go towards another dictatorship.